There shouldn't be a clear goal for rock and roll. It should just be rebellion for the sake of rebellion, with naked women all over the place backstage. Personally, I don't share your biases. You know, I love women so much that I think they should always be naked backstage. Excellent. With the name Lemmy Kilmister, you can be sure that you're listening to pure rock and roll. In a world where rock music is becoming more commercialized and musicians change to please the people, Lemmy never gave up. Not a star or an icon that had been polished by the media. He was freedom, speed, and a beat that sounded like a Harley engine on the open highway. With a bottle of Jack Daniels in one hand and his famous Rickenbacker bass in the other, Lemmy never had to show who he was. You could just listen to his songs to find out. The crazy lines in Ace of Spades, the steady beat in Overkill, and his unique, gravelly voice that sounds like a wild animal. Lemmy did not follow the rules. He didn't follow anyone else's rules. He made his own. He wasn't interested in the shiny side of fame, following trends, or looking for approval. He devoted his whole life to rock and roll. What, though, made Lemmy so strong? He was born to break rules, but it wasn't easy for him to become a hero. Starting right here, let's go on a trip with Lemmy Kilmister, the best rock musician the world has ever known. Beginnings. The world was still trying to get back on its feet after World War II when Lemmy Kilmister was born on December 24, 1945, in Stoke-on-Trent, England. But his life has been a fight ever since he was born. When Lemmy was only 3 months old, his father, who was a priest in the Royal Air Force, left the family. Lemmy grew up in the village of Madeley, Staffordshire, with his mother and stepfather. He didn't have a father figure, so it wasn't a peaceful youth. It was clear to him right away that he didn't fit with his stepfather because they never got along. When they moved to Anglesey, Wales, he was the only English-speaking child in a town where everyone spoke Welsh. He felt like an outsider and was often picked on for being different. He didn't fight back with arms, though. He fought back with an attitude, an early spark of defiance and rebellion that would shape him for the rest of his life. His childhood wasn't very good, but music was only slightly better. Really impressed the first time he heard the Beatles. John Lennon was more than just a singer. He was a rebellious person who did things that other people wouldn't. Suddenly, Lemmy knew. This was the way he would go. He was not only a huge Beatles fan, he also became a passionate young player who practiced for hours every day. Teachers, friends, and even Lemmy's family never thought he would become famous. That changed when I was in high school. When Lemmy saw that the best guitar players always had the most beautiful girls around them, he knew he had to become a musician. He dropped out of school without a plan when he was 15 and went straight into rock and roll. He worked as a factory worker, a technician, and even as Jimi Hendrix's roadie, which he called a genius from another planet. It was never enough to work behind the scenes, though. The world didn't make Lemmy to serve anyone. He naturally belonged on stage. That's how the trip started. Beginners in their careers. When Lemmy dropped out of school, he didn't have a plan B. Stable jobs and long-term safety didn't bother him. It was all rock and roll for him. But getting into the music business wasn't easy for a young man who didn't have any training or ties in the field. To make ends meet, he did a lot of odd jobs. Manufacturing worker, truck driver, or even someone who works in a slot machine plant. However, Lemmy was always on stage at night in small bars playing cover songs. He had a burning dream that one day he wouldn't just be in the background. He would be the one making the stage burst. He got a big chance in 1967 when he was hired as Jimi Hendrix's roadie. Working for a famous musician like Hendrix wasn't a glamorous job, but it was very helpful for a young artist who was still trying to find his place in the world. He learned how to be a real rock star on stage and how rock music was more than just notes. Living that way was normal. Lemmy once said that Hendrix didn't just play the guitar, he became a part of the sound, and he didn't care about rules or other common ways of doing things. That way of thinking would affect how Lemmy worked with music. Unpolished and flawed, but always raw and explosive. But Lemmy was never the type to always be in the background. He looked for a way to get on stage himself after working as a roadie for a while. He joined a small beat rock band called the Rockin' Vickers. This was his first real experience with professional rock music. His first taste of what it's like to be a real artist came from touring with them in the UK and Europe. For Lemmy, though, the Rockin' Vickers were too safe. The crowd-pleasing music didn't interest him. It wasn't enough for him to just want catchy tunes. He wanted something louder, wilder, and stormier. Early in his career, Lemmy's life was anything but exciting. He moved from band to band without knowing if any of them would be successful. Some days, he didn't have any money and slept on park seats. However, he was unable to stop. Music wasn't an option. It was a gut feeling, a decision that couldn't be changed. The turning point came when Lemmy joined Sam Gopal, an Indian-influenced trippy rock band. It was the first time he played with a more professional group, recorded a CD, and was officially a part of the music business. As a result, Lemmy wasn't made for dreamy, trippy rock. He needed to be quick, mean, and strong. He knew his real journey hadn't started yet, because he was feeling something much deeper than the genre's swirling tunes. His restless spirit took him to Hawkwind, the band that would be Lemmy's first real step into the rock and roll world. Good luck with your job. When Lemmy Kilmister joined Hawkwind in 1971, it changed the course of his career. This was not only a well-known trippy rock band, but it was also the place where Lemmy switched from guitar to bass, a decision that would forever change the way he played music. But while most bassists played along with the band's beat, Lemmy used his bass as a weapon, playing it like a lead guitar with loud, fast riffs that made a sound that was dense, angry, and never-ending. As soon as Lemmy joined Hawkwind, he became an unstoppable force, helping the band have big hits with records like Hall of the Mountain Grill, 1974, and Dormi Fazzo Latido, 1972. Lemmy's rough, strong voice made one of their biggest hits, Silver Machine, a sci-fi-themed song, even more electrifying. Lemmy's unique bass playing, powerful singing, and unwavering attitude were all big parts of Hawkwind's rise to fame. Hawkwind's spacey, dreamy sound never really fit Lemmy, though. Although the band was playing spacey tunes, Lemmy wanted something faster, heavier, and more explosive. Then, in 1975, everything fell apart when he was caught with drugs at the Canadian border. The band had enough of his crazy life. Luckily, it was just amphetamines and not heroin. As soon as he was free, Hawkwind shot him. But Lemmy didn't let it make him lose it. Instead, he saw it as a chance. He would make his own band that played the music he really wanted if he couldn't keep playing with Hawkwind. In this way, Motorhead came to life. Starting out, nothing was simple. Lemmy wanted to call the band Bastard at first, but his boss told him that name would not get them booked. Eventually, he chose Motorhead, which is a slang word for someone who uses amphetamines, clearly a nod to the way he lives. There was no record deal or help from the business for Lemmy, so he didn't care. He got Larry Wallace to play guitar and Lucas Fox to play drums, and they started on a journey that would last more than 40 years. Automobile Head's early years were full of problems. The band tried very hard to get a record deal, but big labels kept turning them down, and almost got lost before they even began. Nevertheless, Lemmy refused to give up. He put together an unbeatable group with Fast Eddie Clarke on guitar and Phil "Filthy Animal" Taylor on drums. Thereafter, everything changed. Motorhead's debut record, which came out in 1977, had a sound that was unlike anything else out there at the time. It is quick, rough, violent, and full of pure energy. Beyond Overkill, 1979, and Bomber, 1979, though, were the albums that really made the band famous. This rock band wasn't like the rest. In a perfect mix of punk, heavy metal, and classic rock and roll, they made something completely new. This set the stage for speed metal and thrash metal in the years to come. Then Ace of Spades came out in 1980. It was this song that made Lemmy famous forever, from a headstrong rocker. With just a bass opening, he made an anthem that became one of the best rock songs of all time and defined Motorhead's whole career. Motorhead were one of the most popular bands of their time, and the album with the same name was their biggest commercial hit. It put them at the top of the UK rock scene. On the other hand, Lemmy never set out to be successful. Charts, awards, and acceptance from the music business didn't matter to him. His only goal was to keep doing the things he enjoyed, like playing music, drinking whiskey, and living like there was no tomorrow. Motorhead kept making records like Iron Fist, 1982, Another Perfect Day, 1983, and Orgasmatron, 1986, in the 1980s, keeping their die-hard fans interested even as music styles changed. Even though Lemmy was successful, he never changed. Every day, he still drank Jack Daniels and smoked like there was no tomorrow. He also still thought honest music was the most important thing in the world. His answer to questions about Motorhead was always easy. No changes were made to the original sentence. It wasn't just music for Lemmy when he was on stage with the loud bass and crazy crowds. He was a rock superstar who never gave up on anything. While some bands changed with the times, Motorhead stayed the same. Fast, loud, and unbending. Dealing with storms costs money, though. As the years went by, Lemmy's years of living a wild lifestyle began to catch up with him. Even though his health was getting worse, he never stopped. Through the whole show, Lemmy couldn't stay away from the stage. Personal life. Lemmy Kilmister was a giant in the music world and also had one of the wildest personalities in rock history. One thing that could not be argued with about him was that he was real. No masks, no act, and never trying to make other people happy. His private life was a stark difference between living a wild life and being alone. Between having thousands of women but no serious relationships and being brutally honest and always being in the news. It was clear that Lemmy never got married because he didn't want to hurt anyone. He thought that marriage meant having things and being responsible, which didn't fit in with rock and roll. Even so, that didn't mean he was alone all the time. He once said he slept with more than 1,000 women, but he swore he never cheated or used anyone. Lemmy thought of women as friends on his crazy trip, but no one could hold him down. In spite of never having a traditional family, Lemmy had a boy named Paul Ender in the 1960s with a woman named Patricia. As a child, though, Paul didn't have much contact with Lemmy. After Paul grew up, they really got back in touch. It was never Lemmy's goal to be a great dad. He also never said he wasn't responsible. Even though his father didn't raise him, Paul later became interested in music and even performed on stage with Lemmy sometimes, a late but important link. Even though millions of people admired Lemmy, he stayed alone in his own way. He never had a fancy house or stayed in a fancy hotel. His whole life revolved around a small apartment in Los Angeles that was only a few steps away from Rainbow Bar and Grill, his favorite place to drink, play slots, and talk to friends like he was any other guy. Lemmy never thought of himself as a hero when he wasn't on stage. But his bluntness and unwillingness to fit in made him the center of a lot of problems. One thing that people didn't understand about Lemmy very well was his interest in Nazi memorabilia. Some people wondered if he had fascist sympathies because he gathered medals, insignias, and military artifacts from World War II. That was never true of Lemmy, though. In no way did he back the Nazis. Basically, he was just interested in war history. But no matter how many times he tried to describe himself, people who didn't understand him would always see this as a bad thing. Also, Lemmy was known for having strong views that often caused trouble in the rock world. When Metallica changed their style, he attacked them. He also called MTV music garbage and never hesitated to make fun of artists he thought were too soft or commercialized. No matter how shocking what Lemmy said was, no one could say he wasn't honest. Not once did he say sorry for what he did or what he thought. But Lemmy had his own scars hidden beneath his tough appearance. He once talked about how the love of his life died of heroin when he was young. After that, he hated the drug so much that he never used it again. He smoked like a fire, drank whiskey like water, and used amphetamines almost his whole life, but he would not accept heroin. Lemmy's life was a fascinating story of opposites. A man who lived his life to the fullest but stayed very alone. Someone who wasn't trying to get famous became a hero. A brave person with wounds that would never heal. There were arguments and disputes about him, but one thing could not be denied. Lemmy was one of the most open, honest, and genuinely real people in rock and roll history. Last years in history. Even after never taking a break, Lemmy Kilmister had no plans to stop. He kept getting on stage, playing at lightning speed, and drinking like there was no tomorrow, even though most artists slowed down as they got older. That being said, machines break down eventually, and Lemmy was very strong, but he couldn't pass time. In his last few years, Lemmy's health started to get worse. Even though he still drank Jack Daniels every day, booze was no longer his best friend. It turned out to be his traitor. After being told by doctors that he had diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart failure, he had to cut down on drinking, which was probably the last thing he ever imagined doing in his life. Though Lemmy's body kept going off, his spirit never gave up. Just a few months before he turned 70 years old in 2015, Lemmy was still on stage with Motorhead on the Bad Magic Tour. Nobody doubted that he wasn't the same. His voice was weaker, and he was stumbling over his steps. He got so tired at one point that he had to end a show in the middle, which had never happened before. Lemmy could have complained or taken a break to rest, but he just smiled and told the crowd, "I'll make it up to you next time." But there would be no more times like that. Lemmy sat down in front of his favorite slot machine at Rainbow Bar and Grill on December 26, 2015, just like every other day. After only 4 days of being told he had prostate cancer, he died at home 2 days later. Someone famous died in the rock world. But those who knew him best knew that he had died the same way he lived, without sorrow or surrender, and never showing weakness when he knew he was going to die. It wasn't just Motorhead and their fans who lost Lemmy when he died. It ended a time period. Lemmy was more than just a drummer in the rock world. He stood for total honesty and a strong will not to give in, of a life in which nothing or anyone must be obeyed. Lemmy is no longer with us, but his music goes on. Soon after he died, a huge metal statue was put up at Rainbow Bar and Grill, where he spent most of his last years. He was honored by Metallica, Foo Fighters, Ozzy Osbourne, Slash, Dave Grohl, and many other artists, who called him the best man in rock and roll. When Lemmy died, Motorhead broke up right away because no one could replace him. Although sculptures and tributes are nice, Lemmy really left behind the true spirit of rock and roll. His style would never be copied by another artist. Leslie wasn't just a singer. He lived a life that no one else could match. His style was rock and roll. Even if people from other generations never hear of Motorhead, his unmistakable, gravelly voice will always resound through the speakers when Ace of Spades plays, and the picture of a man in a cowboy hat holding his Rickenbacker bass will always represent a time that will never come back. Even though rock and roll changes, Lemmy Kilmister will always be there. Lemmy Kilmister was more than just a hero. He was rock and roll's spirit guide, not willing to give in, never stopping. He came and went like a storm, but he left behind a memory, a way of life, and a sound that can never be replaced. Remember anything about Motorhead? Which Lemmy song made you feel the most pumped up? Tell us what you think in the space below. Please like and subscribe if you think Lemmy's spirit is still alive. This way, we can keep honoring heroes that will never die. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next movie. Thanks for coming.